the best approach to preserving plants and ecosystems is through directly engaging with cultures in which those plants are important. We can do our part through elevating the inextricable link that plants have in shaping cultural beliefs, traditions, and identities for peoples all around the world.
You're listening to Speaking of Language, a podcast recorded at the Language Resource Center at Cornell University. Each week, we explore a topic related to language pedagogy and second language acquisition. This week on Speaking of Language,
Sarah Fiorello welcomes us to the Cornell Botanic Gardens and shares the linguistic and cultural importance of flowers and plants.
Welcome to a new episode of Speaking of Language. I'm Angelica Kramer, the director of the Language Resource Center at Cornell University.
And I'm Sam Lupowitz, the LRC's media manager. We are joined today by Sarah Fiorello, the interpretation coordinator at the Cornell Botanic Gardens.
Sarah will enlighten us about our campus's horticultural wonder and what plants have to do with language and culture. Welcome to Speaking of Language, Sarah.
Thank you so much for having me.
So before we discuss the Botanic Gardens, we always like to ask our guests about their background and path with languages. What does that look like for you?
That's a great question. I can't say that. So I do speak a language, as you know, because I'm speaking English. So I guess we can start there. I grew up in upstate New York. I have heritage, both Italian and German and English, but there were never any other languages spoken in my house besides English, except for a few residual Italian words that I weren't even sure were real Italian words or just words that like my grandmother made up. There's a lot of funny stories about, I thought that was a word, not a person, in a mythical tale. But I always wish that, my grandparents passed down the Italian language to my mother, and she also wishes the same thing, but it's a very similar history to many families in the United States where they come from other countries and feel like it's necessary to make sure that their children speak English. And so,
of course,
I didn't really have much exposure in my life to other languages besides the New York State curriculum of taking a language. So I took French for the amount of time required to get a Regents diploma.
There you go. Huh?
I did enjoy it. I did enjoy learning the language for sure. So I've always been interested in languages and learning languages. What I find is most fascinating about languages is how much you learn about cultures. And I'm sure we'll be talking about that in this podcast.
Absolutely. Wonderful. Very, very cool. So tell us about the Botanic Gardens. What is the history? What roles does it serve in the broader Cornell community? We want to hear all about it.
Oh, wow. Yes. Well, I definitely am an advocate for all the ways in which it serves the Cornell community. Well, to start with the basics, what is Cornell Botanic Gardens? Our elevator speech for that is, we are both the botanical gardens and the natural areas of Cornell University. So it's many people, when they think of Cornell Botanic Gardens, might think of our Welcome Center and 12 specialty gardens around that space, which are beautiful and rich in many ways. We also, just down the street from that, have a 100-acre arboretum, which some students might find their way to, and others, it's a little off the beaten path.
Sure.
So we really try to advocate for this another beautiful space to if you are in a natural science related field, a lot of your classes might go there. But if you're more over here on the arts and sciences quad, you might not make it down there academically. But we really try to encourage students to say, hey, this is a great place to take a walk. This is a great place to meet your friend and decompress. Like, this is where you go to not study.
There you go.
This is where you go to take a deep breath, enjoy the beauty of nature at its finest. We offer lots of quiet spaces, benches with beautiful views. So definitely make an effort to advocate that for both students, staff, and faculty to be a place of wellness in many different ways. We do that by offering tours that are geared towards more, taking a break and meditating. We offer that this just through sheer communication through different channels of letting students know, hey, take a study break. Of course, we're also there to support the academic community as well. Undergrads go to the Botanic Gardens for classes, whether it be horticulture, ecology, and, all those related fields. But we're more than just there for the academic service of CALS. Yep. I mean, we have art history classes come down to really learn about stories of specific plants.
Right.
We have anthropology classes come down to learn about the mythological stories associated with many of the plants in our herb garden. So AA art, AAP, their students come down for inspiration for art. So we really collaborate with a lot of staff and faculty and students on campus.
That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, and I like how this is encapsulated in your mission too, right? Grow, inspire, and connect. That's, basically what you just shared.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, to get a little bit deeper into our mission, we really want to inspire people through, like you just said, through our cultivated spaces, also so through cultivation, but also we steward, we care for most of the natural lands adjacent to campus. I like to joke and say that Cornell University is a gorge sandwich, where we have Fall Creek Gorge to the north and Cascadilla Gorge to the south. And along those, river corridors are a lot of rich, protected natural areas. So our staff make sure that not only are they safe for people to access and hike, but also that the ecosystems are healthy as well. And so BB Lake, when you're hiking through BB Lake, you're in Cornell Botanic Gardens, but sometimes that, we try to be clear about that, but we like to make sure people also know that all of those more naturalistic experiences that you have walking through woods or gorges are also part of the Cornell Botanic Gardens experience.
Yep. That's wonderful.
Terrific. Sarah, you're the interpretation coordinator at the Botanic Gardens.
Yep.
So what are your responsibilities as an individual and as part of the larger education team?
Yeah, great question. Yes, so as you said, interpretation coordinator, in that capacity, I'm in charge of all of the ways in which we communicate to our visitors, whether they're, people visiting as tourists or students coming down for a class, all of the ways in which we communicate to them in order for them to connect more deeply with what they're experiencing. So that can be anything from exhibits within our Welcome Center to signage out in the gardens that maybe introduce one of our gardens, or even the individual labels on plants. We also offer audio narratives, which we'll be talking about in this podcast.
Surely.
As well as guided tours using your smartphone by downloading an app and walking specific routes and learning about the highlights along those routes. There's many forms of tools we give our visitors to be able to both explore our areas by themselves and also tour through guided tours. And so all of those are different forms of interpretation. So under my purview, I make sure that we have a cohesive plan of what our messaging are through these different modes of interpretation, and to make sure that we're accomplishing both the goals of what we want to communicate as an organization, but also meet people where they are and meet the interests of the people who visit as well.
Yeah.
So there's a prescribed process and a profession of interpretation in which there are best practices for making sure you do that in the best way.
Nice. Yeah. So you already alluded to this, but we here at the LRC have recently been involved in recording audio guides for the Botanic Gardens in some new languages. Let's talk about how this project came about and what benefits you anticipate.
Great. Great question. First of all, I just want to thank both the Language Resource Center as well as the Translator-Interpreter program here at Cornell. It's such a valuable resource to be able to tap into. I preface this because now I'll answer your question and you'll realize why it was amazing that we have this resource to do so. So I mentioned that part of my job was to create a plan for what we want to interpret. When we updated and made a plan for what we wanted to do from 2020 to 2025, one of the high priorities for us was to translate some of our audio narratives into other languages, specifically because we were really looking at how our visitors come from this is Cornell University. People
Sure.
come from all over the world.
Yep.
We only offered our interpretation in one language and felt that that was falling short from the audience we were serving. And so we deliberately put a task in our interpretive master plan to start with converting our audio narratives into different languages as a first step of addressing how we're going to communicate with people who speak different languages. So our first step was let's look at data and see what are the second to English, what are the two languages most spoken by both students who come here and their families.
Yep.
And the data clearly showed Mandarin and Spanish. So we said that's a perfect first step. Let's translate those audio narratives into those languages. Then we said, how are we going to do that? And I did a little searching and quickly learned about the translator interpretive program and said, there is a service on campus. I wasn't sure if we would have to hire Spanish and Mandarin speaking people to, engage with this. I wasn't sure what the cost around this would be, but we committed to it. So we were exploring all options. And so I reached out to Matt at the TIP program and he said, we'd love to do it. And that's how it all started.
Very nice. That's awesome.
Yeah. We have about 24 different audio narratives, all of which are 2 to 3 minutes long. It wasn't a simple task, let's put it that way.
There's so much, and I feel like I'm learning a lot as I go through the translations and learning about what's on offer here. So the TIP students are wonderful.
Yes.
We had them on the podcast earlier.
Oh, nice.
While we are focusing on languages and cultures, since that's what we do on the podcast, what are some other ways that what you do at the Botanic Gardens intersect with culture and perhaps language? What opportunities are there for language learners and educators?
I really love that question. Getting back to our mission, which I started to unravel and then didn't fully come back for a full circle, I'm going to start there and then show you how that drives the interpretation that we do, which really does intersect languages in many different ways. So our mission is through our conservation efforts, through our cultivation efforts, and our education efforts to inspire people to both understand, appreciate, and nurture plants and the cultures that they sustain. Our director has been very active globally in an effort to conserve natural lands through engaging with the cultures in which are connected to those lands through many different channels. And back at the Botanic Gardens, we can play our part in really advocating for that understanding that the best approach to preserving plants and ecosystems is through directly engaging with cultures in which those plants are important. We can do our part through elevating the inextricable link that plants have in shaping cultural beliefs, traditions, and identities for peoples all around the world. We plant not only plants that are native to the Northeast, but plants that can grow in this climate from all over the world. So that affords us many opportunities in which to really elevate that deep relationship through the type of interpretation we offer. So the way this really connects to plants is, and what fascinates me about language in general, is how much you can understand about the values and identity and traditions of cultures through the meanings behind words. So I mentioned that we created an interpretive master plan. One of the quote-unquote tasks in there is deliberately written as such, whenever possible, include language to show that relationship that a culture has with nature.
Oh, wow.
And so when we create exhibitions in our Welcome Center, or we've been really focusing on one culture and planting a larger scale exhibition.
Right.
This is the opportunity to pull in language as a way to have that relationship between those plants and that culture come to life. For example, we are working with a group of students and staff who have Indigenous heritage to help us create an exhibition that can celebrate the diversity of Indigenous communities in which students on campus are from. And that's a way in which they can tell their stories about their identities and their heritage.
Nice.
And we just had a meeting the other day about how we want to share words from different cultures as a way to show that relationship. And I'm very excited about it. So that's one way in which language is going to be really front and center in our interpretation.
Yeah. Well, and I know that the teaching of Cayuga here on campus, there was a lot that when this first started, where the instructor would actually take the students into the Botanic Gardens, and they would specifically look at plants and do exactly what you just described, right? Looking at, what's local, what's the meaning. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a really exciting project. And Stephen Henhock was the original instructor of that class, and he is one of the remaining Gayokono speakers. And we collaborated to create signage for the general public as well as instruction for his class to understand what these words are for the key agricultural plants that have sustained the Gayokono for thousands of years.
Yeah, that's wonderful. Sarah, what are you looking forward to at the gardens? Are there any exciting new programs or projects coming down the pike? I mean, it sounds like you already have your plate quite full, but...
No, I'm really excited about this new plant exhibition that we are collaborating with students of Indigenous heritage, because I feel like that's really going to honor and acknowledge the diversity of Indigenous students we have here at Cornell, as well as inherently use language as a way to understand culture. I'm very excited about that particular project, and we're hoping that it'll start small this growing season and then grow over 3 years, and continue to collaborate with other people of Indigenous heritage to add stories to this exhibit.
That's wonderful.
So that's a big focus of how we carry out our mission.
Great.
Where can our listeners find out more about the Botanic Gardens, Sarah?
Our website is cornellbotanicgardens.org. It's really set up to give people an overview of all the places they can explore and visit. If you are a listener who also works or resides in the Cornell campus or around Cornell campus, I really encourage you to take a walk down and visit our friendly faces at the Welcome Center.
Absolutely.
Our staff there will give you a great orientation to where, customize your visit to what you're interested or what you want to explore. And even though it's, early February, our winter garden is looking really beautiful. And there are, winter hikes. Sometimes I feel like I need more because I feel so stir crazy inside. So I really encourage people just to put on a warm enough coat to take a brisk walk down and see all the snow-covered trees in the Arboretum or around our Welcome Center.
Yeah, wonderful. That's awesome. Yeah, I can only second that. This is definitely an underused resource for myself personally. I should visit so much more frequently than I do, and every time I do, I'm just in awe of, what's blossoming at the time and just the sheer acreage that's available to go out and enjoy nature.
Yeah.
I do think we all need to
It is really beautiful.
do that more frequently.
Yeah, it's good for you.
Since we are interested in languages and words, can you please shed light on why the name is Botanic Gardens and not Botanical Gardens?
Yes, I will. That's a great question.
That is a good question.
Yes. Well, I mentioned our director, Dr. Christopher Dunn. He also is a enthusiast about language and grammar, and recognize that in that context, it's more grammatically correct to say Botanic Gardens as opposed to botanical. Botanical describes maybe something that has floral associations, but if you're a garden with plants in it, there's a few botanic gardens in the U.S. and abroad whom use the term botanic versus botanical.
Correct.
But it's a mix, right? It's funny because I have to sometimes double check if I'm typing the name of a botanic garden. Do they use botanic or do they use botanical to make sure?
Absolutely.
So.
That's great. Well, Sarah, this is wonderful. The Botanic Gardens are an amazing place to be, an amazing resource for anyone and everyone on campus. So we urge our listeners to spend more time at the Botanic Gardens.
Thank you.
Before we sign off, we would like to ask you for a word in a language that you love, that you are learning, that you speak, that you may want to learn, that makes you feel good. What might that word be?
It's a great question. Well, the word I love to say is joie de vivre. Doesn't it just roll off your tongue?
Sure
Yep,
does.
absolutely. I like it.
I say that about I have one child who just is full of joie de vivre, you know, and sometimes I feel like he's like a mirror of myself. You know, kids have a tendency to do that, and so people describe him in that way, and other people in my life have described me in that way. But I just feel like the word sounds like it means because it has that energy.
Very true. Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I studied French, like I mentioned briefly in high school, because you had to take a language. I don't know if French would be my language I would jump in to take again. I actually am very interested in, I took the Gayakono language class when it was first offered, and I'd love to continue to understand that culture more deeply through language.
Sure.
So, but I'm not adept enough right now to speak any of the words in a way that I felt like I could do them justice.
Sure. Well, there is a place on campus where you can do that.
This has really been a pleasure. Thank you so much for speaking of language with us, Sarah.
Yeah. Thank you so much for inviting me.
Next week, we'll follow up with our first guest speaker of the semester.
Dr. Chris Eric Knisely will share best practices in gender justice in language education, encouraging each of us to consider the question, what will we do to work toward a world where language enriches the livability of all of our lives? Until then,
Auf Wiederhören!
The Language Resource Center is located on the ground floor of Stimson Hall on Cornell's main campus in Ithaca, New York. Check us out on the web at lrc.cornell.edu.
and follow Cornell LRC on Facebook, Instagram, and Blue Sky.
Speaking of Language is produced by Angelika Kramer and Sam Lupowitz.
Recorded by Sam Lupowitz.
Original music by Sam Lupowitz, Dan Gable, and Joe Gibson.
Thanks also to the College of Arts and Sciences at Cornell University.
As a reminder, the ideas and opinions expressed on this podcast do not reflect those of the College of Arts and Sciences or any other official entity of Cornell University.
We thank our listeners, and do stay tuned for our next episode.